This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Joining us now in studio is Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Nirav Shah. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so excited to chat.
So
I'm
are
looking
we.
forward to it.
Yes, thank you. We know you're very busy, that's for sure.
It's an honor. It's a real honor.
So you've been hosting town halls for months all over the state. What concerns are you hearing the most from Mainers?
Well, first, on the town halls, they have been by far the highlight of the campaign. The opportunity to go to a town and for folks to come out and share their concerns with me and have a real exchange about what can be done and what they're looking for, it is so meaningful and so valuable. I will also add that because of the way folks know me from my prior role, they are often very at ease in sharing sometimes really difficult details of their lives. Not long ago, an individual shared with me their recent cancer diagnosis and the ways in which they were struggling to get care that they needed. So not only are they instructive, they are also really meaningful to me. That said, I have heard a few commonalities emerge from every single one of the events. Probably at the top has been healthcare, especially in rural Maine, but even in urban areas. The ways in which our healthcare system does not deliver for people probably comes up every single town hall, and most of the conversation is about that. Another issue, of course, is housing and the lack of it, and what we can do, what the state can do to make that better. And then more broadly, our concerns about affordability. Mainers are working harder and getting less. They are paying more and receiving even less for their dollar. So the question is, what can the governor do to help that? And that's been a really wonderful set of discussions that I've had. The next town hall I'm doing is tonight in Pittsfield. So we are literally crisscrossing the state.
Speaking of healthcare and these hospitals that are closing, how do you think we can attract more doctors coming into the state? My concerns is the millionaire tax. And the other thing is our education. A lot of these educated doctors coming in here obviously want the best for their kids and they want to get paid. So do you have a plan to get doctors to come back to the state of Maine?
Yeah, that's a great set of questions. And in the healthcare plan that I released way back in January, it was the very first plan that I put out. And the very first thing in that plan is the shortage of all healthcare providers, particularly doctors, but not just doctors, nurses, physical therapists, lab techs, you name it. But let's focus on the doctors. There's this crazy thing where here in Maine, we actually train and educate a lot of healthcare providers. We've got 2 medical schools in Maine, one at UNE and the other a partnership with Maine Health and Tufts. And a lot of the graduates from those schools, they end up going elsewhere for their training. So these are often Mainers who are going to medical school in Maine, but then they go elsewhere. So the question is why? What could we do to keep them here? And when I've spoken with healthcare education experts here in Maine, one of the reasons why those students go elsewhere is because in medical education, you spend a little bit of time in the classroom, but you really do the bulk of your training in the hospital, in the clinic. It's where you learn the art of working with patients. And we don't have enough of those training slots here in Maine. So what happens is a lot of these students go to New Jersey or Ohio for that finishing training. And then, of course, they meet somebody and then they get a job offer there. So what happens is that where you train is where you end up staying. So job number 1 is to shift that balance. And Augusta and the governor have a big role to play by funding additional opportunities for those students who are already in school here to stay here and do that training at Maine Health or Maine General or EMMC or MDI or at York. So they end up staying here afterwards. We're not talking big money. We're just talking about allowing folks to stay here when they want to. So that's a big part of it. But then more broadly, the other things that prompt people to leave comes back to the same 4 things I've heard over and over again: housing, education, childcare, and healthcare. And if we can just stop being at the back of the pack on all of those, then a lot of those folks will find themselves wanting to stay here.
Well, I'm in real estate. I'm a broker. What is your plan for the housing crisis?
For me, the housing crisis is largely about supply. So The biggest component of my approach to housing is to make it easier to build. And right now in Maine, developer after developer I've spoken with has said, if it were just a little bit easier, sort of similar to the last question, we don't have to be the easiest state in the country to build in. We just have to stop being at the back of the pack. So for me, most of what I want to focus on is to make it easier to build. Some of that entails, for example, helping out towns and municipalities who maybe don't really have a town planning board or a planning official or a code official who can even approve these things at the rate they need to. The state can help augment that workforce. Another thing that I've proposed is to have an infrastructure fund. A lot of municipalities and towns want more developments. It's good for their tax base. It's good for all of the things they want, but they don't have the money to build out the sewer and the drain and the water. Augusta can help with capital infusion that will help those towns get the infrastructure in place, and then the towns can start actually letting the building happen. So for me, that's where the action is. Job number one, make it easier to build, but I also want to make it easier to buy. And there are already good programs in place. I want to make sure that they're funded. And one thing I've heard a lot is to speed them up. The pace of the approvals is sometimes too slow. And as you all know, in the business world, time kills all deals. So when the state takes 6 months to approve something, but the deal needs to close in a week, we haven't actually helped anyone.
So to take it a step further, you are for removing some of the regulations and the red tape to make development easier for developers?
That's exactly right. Now, it's going to vary town by town, municipality by municipality. We have a rich tradition of local control in the state of Maine, and I honor that tradition. That said, there are approaches that we can take that, again, make it just a little bit easier. For example, working with municipalities that want to prioritize density. I'm a big fan of high density development because that means you're cutting down fewer trees and you're actually letting folks live closer to where the jobs are. If there are municipalities that raise their hand and say, hey, we want to change our regulations to make higher density construction more attainable, that's who I want to be working with a lot more. Another approach with respect to red tape, as well as supporting towns and municipalities, is using existing structures. Almost every town in Maine has, whether it's a mill or whether it's an older factory. Now, rehabbing them is not easy, and sometimes it can even be more expensive. But again, I think we can simultaneously balance the need for more housing development without the need to tear down more of what makes Maine great. And in many instances, that is going to entail removing barriers and red tape, things like set-asides, minimum lot sizes. And it's not that I want to impose a one-size-fits-all rule. It's more that when there are towns that raise their hand and say, hey, that's the train we want to be on, I want to be right there to pick them up.
What's your plan on property tax?
Earlier, you asked me what are some of the themes that I've heard. Now, I talked about healthcare, housing, and then I said affordability, but what I really meant was property taxes, because that in the 30 or so town halls, that's probably come up at every single one of them. First of all, it is unacceptable that people in Maine should be priced out of the towns that they grew up in, or that older or retired folks should be forced to sell or move or downsize because they can't afford their property taxes. That's completely unacceptable. There are different competing proposals on the table. The one that I think meets the moment is as follows, and that is to increase the homestead exemption. Right now, the homestead exemption is $25,000. I've penciled out scenarios where certainly $100,000 of an exemption is feasible. It might even be able to be pushed even a little bit higher than that. The reason I favor that approach is that when it comes to property taxes, we are in a crisis. So property taxes are going up across the state. And if you are a homeowner, you are definitely seeing that when you get your bill. But even if you are a renter, you are indirectly seeing the impact of increased property taxes. Now, there are a lot of reasons why rents are going up, but landlords are not exempt from property taxes. So the increase in property taxes affects everyone across the state, and thus a reason why we need to think about this as a crisis and provide immediate relief. So I want to focus on solutions that can be put into effect as governor with the legislature quickly, rather than something that gets tied up in courts and things of that nature. So that's the approach that I take. Now, I want to acknowledge that even that pathway has limitations. A lot of folks in Maine have second homes. A lot of folks have camps. So that might affect them. So I just want to be upfront about the limitations. But to me, this is the fastest and most equitable solution that will actually provide meaningful relief.
When you say they may have a second home or a camp, because a lot of those are generational, are you saying that their taxes would then increase on the second home?
Not necessarily increase, but they wouldn't benefit from the higher homestead exemption. That, of course, only applies to the primary residence.
Right.
And in some areas, because of the increase in homestead exemption, the town and municipality may have to shift more of that tax burden onto second homes, the non-exempt homes. So I just always like to be clear when it comes to policy, what the drawbacks are of my own proposals. I think as a leader, that's the only thing you can do with integrity, is to be clear about the own limitations. This is a very difficult situation, and my style of leadership is to acknowledge we're not really in a world with easy solutions. Where we are is a world of difficult trade-offs. And one of the ways that I think about leadership is that for every difficult problem, there is a solution that is easy, fast, and wrong. When you deal with a tough problem like property taxes, it's so easy to get distracted by the shiny object, but that's not leadership. Real leadership is saying, this is my plan, this is what I think it'll do, but I want to be upfront about what some of the drawbacks are.
So I'm sure you heard on the campaign trail about education, and our numbers have been dropping over the last few years. What's your plan on that?
Earlier, I mentioned when we were talking about healthcare providers, but it applies to any young family that's looking to move to the state of Maine. 4 reasons that they all cite as obstacles: housing, healthcare, childcare, and education. And it's come up over and over again, particularly the fact that Maine not long ago was a beacon. So we've got more work to do. Let me first start by noting that I myself am a proud product of public schools. Until the second I went to graduate school, from pre-K all the way through college, I am a very proud public school graduate. So job number 1 for me is to stand up for public schools. There are efforts out there that are trying to weaken public schools, not just in Maine, but across the country. And I am firmly opposed to any effort to divert money from public schools or to weaken the institution of public schools. Indeed, my focus is going to be to go the opposite direction and shore up Maine's public schools, not detract from them. So how do we go about doing that? Well, making sure that the workforce of educators is where it needs to be. Maine has been, over the years, losing more educators every single year than we train. The numbers are pretty shocking, but we lose every year about 800 educators across the state, accounting for the number who leave the profession and adjusting it for the number who come in. So that's unsustainable. We have made strides in increasing teachers' salaries, raising the minimum to $50,000. That's a good step forward, but I should note that it's going to take us a couple of years to get there. But even then, we're still going to be behind where the starting salary in Massachusetts is today. And if you're a young person coming out of college in Maine with a degree in education, you've got choices. And if you can make more in Massachusetts today than you can 3 years from now in Maine, some folks are going to choose to go there. So I want to continue increasing salaries. I want to build upon the work that's been done. There's so many different directions that we can go with education. But the other one that I have heard from parents, educators, and school officials across the state are the numerous challenges that students are facing. Behavioral health issues, compounded by social stress, all of that are leading to some pretty shocking statistics around the number of kids in Maine schools that have contemplated things like suicide and self-harm. It's pretty staggering. And some of that is because we ask teachers to do everything. We ask teachers to not just be teachers, but guidance counselors, behavioral health counselors, security guards. We've got to make sure that they've got the help they need. That's one approach that other states have taken, and that's an approach that I'd like to take here. The last thing I'll mention is that other states across the country have made significant strides in turning their school systems around. Mississippi is the one state that a lot of folks talk about, but there are others who have replicated it. And I think Maine's got a lot to learn from those other states to figure out what they did that we could import here to make it appropriate for our state.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Nirav Shah. Let's talk about your new capstone policy plan, which is ending childhood hunger.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
I'm glad that you brought that up. This one is really important as someone with a background in public health and healthcare. The day I launched my campaign, I outlined 4 priorities. And those were to feed kids, to fund our healthcare system, to fix housing, and to fuel the growth of the economy. So feeding kids was deliberately the very first one on the list. And I think we can all understand why. If kids are not well fed, it's crazy to think that they could do well in school. If kids are malnourished, it's crazy to think that they would go on to lead healthy lives. And when all of that gets put together, not only is it a human tragedy, it's also an economic one. We're capping our economic growth when kids in Maine are routinely going hungry. And the statistics are staggering. Right now in Maine, about 1 in 5 kids is hungry. They don't know when their next meal is going to come and where it's going to come from. What are we doing as a government, as a society in 2026, if 1 in 5 kids doesn't have enough food to eat? I started the campaign on that foot, and that's where I wanted to end it as well, to come full circle. So yesterday, I released a comprehensive roadmap for how I will tackle childhood hunger in Maine. And there's a lot of pieces to it. Some of it involves dipping into the rainy day fund to shore up the SNAP program. Some of it involves making it easier for schools to buy local produce and seafood. Some of it involves making it easier for families who are already receiving, say, MaineCare benefits to also get food assistance without having to do 2 separate applications. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. But my thing as governor will be to make it a priority and to make sure that I'm holding my staff accountable to it. In leadership and in management, as you all know, there's an old saying that what gets measured gets managed. And one of my priorities as governor will be, as often as the statistics are published, to make sure that the second the new childhood numbers come out, I am calling my staff, asking what we're doing about it and holding them accountable to goals. That's what real management and leadership looks like. And that's how I'm going to approach this issue.
So speaking of MaineCare, what's your opinion of the alleged fraud that's going on?
Here's how I think about this. And let me take a step back. Prior to becoming a public servant, I practiced law for about 10 years. I'm really an attorney by background. I went to medical school and I'm a proud medical school graduate, but by profession, I am an attorney. And one of the areas in which I practiced, though not the only, but one of them was on healthcare, working and thinking a lot about cases that dealt with fraud. So I'm going to say 2 things that are seemingly pulling in different directions, but are really part of the same thing. Number 1 is that fraud rates in Maine for Medicaid are incredibly low, much lower than the national average. And the numbers are in a video that I did, so I won't go through all of them here, but at baseline, Medicaid fraud rates in Maine are significantly lower, about 25% lower than the national average. And there are at least 4 or 5 separate entities in Maine that are tasked with spotting, investigating, and prosecuting Medicaid fraud. So I think Maine finds itself in a good position relative to being able to spot and prosecute Medicaid fraud. That said, I do think Republicans are onto something. Fraud, no matter how big or how small, is an offense to all taxpayers. That is our hard-earned money that someone is stealing. So let me just be really clear. I don't think Democrats have taken fraud seriously enough. As governor, given my background as an attorney in healthcare, this is an area that I will make sure I am paying special attention to. Do I think the scope and scale of the problem is what the Trump administration and Vice President Vance claim it to be? I don't. Again, we start off in a better position. I also think that some of their discussion of fraud is not in good faith. I think they are sometimes using it for code in order to undermine Medicaid, or even as a backhanded way to throw cold water on some of our Black and brown friends. So I don't know that their efforts are entirely in good faith. But what I will end with is saying, yes, fraud is an offense to all taxpayers and we should go after it. But let's not just focus on Medicaid fraud. There's a lot of fraud in the government. Let's, for example, focus on the fact that members of the Trump administration are trading in these cryptocurrency schemes. That's fraud. We should go after that. Members of Congress are not yet prohibited from trading in stocks. Let's go after that. That's fraud too. So I want to go hard on fraud, not just healthcare fraud, but all of it.
Do you have any concern about the fraud that could possibly go on with the PFML?
Not particularly. So here's what I mean. Every single government program is susceptible in various and different ways to bad actors taking advantage of it. And anytime there is a new program, the calculus that I make is, are the upsides bigger and more socially valuable than the potential downsides? Is there the possibility of fraud from paid family medical leave? Certainly there is. That's the case with any government program. So then for me, the question is, can we put guardrails in place to limit that fraud? And thus far, what I've seen, not just in Maine, but in other states, is that there are guardrails to spot and prevent that from happening. Those have to be balanced, I will say, because if you put too many guardrails around something at the front end, you block people from potentially who need it taking advantage of it. So there is a balance there. Am I particularly concerned? No more so than I am with any other government program, which is to say good management and oversight can help block some of that at the front end.
Along those same lines, do you plan on looking into the procurement issues that were highlighted in the audit report by State Auditor Matt Dunlap?
The answer there is yes. And this is where having served as an executive in state government will benefit me. As the director of first the Department of Health in Illinois and then director of the Maine CDC, a large part of your job is to look at these contracts and these grants and these RFPs to make sure that they check off all the boxes because it's your signature on them. So I do think Mr. Dunlap and other auditors are correct in shining a spotlight on these instances. And we should, again, always be looking to shore up more of our procurement system. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, though. Having come from Illinois, which was a governmental and economic basket case in just about every way, the procurement system in Maine, I find to be far more streamlined and far less susceptible to a lot of the game playing that I saw firsthand in Illinois. I don't think Democrats have taken this issue seriously enough. I think they have taken it seriously. And indeed, just in Minnesota, an individual was just sentenced not long ago. So I don't want to suggest that there has been a head in the sand approach. What I am suggesting is that fraud is an unfortunate feature of just about every single program that exists. Is there fraud with car warranties? Yes, there is. Is there fraud with government programs? Yes, there is. Is there fraud on the real estate market? Unfortunately, there is. My thing is that my background as an attorney sensitizes me to these issues. And where I go with it is not to dismiss them. Rather, it's to say, yes, let's take that more seriously. Let's look under that rock. If there is something to be found, I want to be the first one to go after it. But I don't want to just limit it to programs that are run by Somalis or programs that serve people who are in need of healthcare. I want to cast an even bigger net.
So let's pivot to small business. I noticed on your site that you have a plan for small business owners. Tell us about it.
Yeah. We've been talking so far about a lot of the approaches I take to social services and service delivery. But the core of Maine and the core of Maine's economy is not state government. It is small businesses. Well over 90% of the businesses in Maine are small businesses. And more than half of the people employed in the state of Maine are employed by a small business. So when I think about growing our economy, that's where I start. So what I did on the campaign trail was to convene as many small business owners as I could to sit around tables like this and ask them one question, which is, what could Augusta do to make your life easier or to have made your life easier when you were starting your business? And I got a lot of good answers, and a lot of them are contained in that plan, but I want to spotlight two of them. One of the first things that almost everyone said in one way or another was, if Augusta could help me hire my first employee, boy, that'd be a big help. Because once I get that first employee on board, it's easier to hire the 5th employee, the 10th employee, the 50th employee. But that first one, a major step. And the compliance, filing taxes, filing all of that stuff, what I heard over and over again was Augusta does not make it easy. So a big part of my small business plan is helping the person with an idea in their garage go from being a hobbyist to being an employer. And that really starts with helping them onboard people and make that first hire. So some of that's grants, some of it's more training, some of it's more hand-holding, some of that are just systems that are easier to navigate. But if we can make it easier for that first hire, then we've made it easier for the 5th and the 50th hire. The other thing I heard over and over and over again was that it seems like from the perspective of small business owners, all of the various systems of state government were designed for the convenience of state government, not for entrepreneurs in Aroostook County or in Penobscot County. Here's one example. There is only one state in the country where if you want to register an LLC, you have to do it by mail. That's the state of Maine. In most other states, you got a business idea, you want to get cranking, you want to get an LLC up, you do it online, you get it in 15 minutes. In Maine, we make you do it by mail. And again, it's an example of where our systems seem like they are set up not for the convenience of entrepreneurs, but for the convenience of Augusta. We already have access to a lot of this information, whether it's for sales tax filings, again, labor and employment filings. There is a lot of work that other states have been very successful in doing in making it easier for a small business to just work with the state of Maine. There's a lot more behind it than that, but those are just two as part of what I've heard that entrepreneur after entrepreneur has said, boy, would really help a lot.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 with Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate Dr. Nirav Shah. Make sure to tune in to Part 2 tomorrow, Sunday, June 7th at 6:30 a.m. on VOM, The Voice of Maine.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.